Remembrance and respect. President Donald Trump joins world leaders in France to honor the 75th anniversary of D-Day, plus words from the Vatican. The Pope and President Putin, the Holy Father, will meet the Russian leader ahead of his meeting with Ukrainian leaders next month. Communion ban. The head of a diocese in Illinois issues a decree about two pro-abortion Catholic lawmakers. And direct message, why a pro-life group says Twitter is targeting its content. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, June 6, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. World leaders gather in Normandy, France to commemorate 75 years since the D-Day invasion. It was history's largest air and sea invasion, involving around 160,000 troops. It changed the course of World War II with thousands of casualties. Among the solemn moments and remembrances today was a message sent from Pope Francis.
I express the hope that this commemoration event will allow all the generations in Europe and the whole world to strongly reassert that peace is based on the respect of each person, whatever his or her background.
Cardinal Marc Ouellet read the words of the Holy Father at Bayeux Cathedral. It was the first Normandy town liberated by Allied troops after D-Day. President Trump honored the heroes, saying they're among the greatest Americans who will ever live. At today's memorial in Normandy, he said they fought for their generation and for millions of people yet to be born.
The lives that they gave, the sacrifice that they made, did not just win a battle. It did not just win a war. Those who fought here won a future for our nation.
French President Emmanuel Macron joined President Trump and told American D-Day veterans that France doesn't forget what they sacrificed for his country's freedom. And at Arlington National Cemetery today, a family buried their father, who stormed that beach in the second wave. White House correspondent Mark Irons shares the story.
His first step on Normandy Beach was on some young man's chest.
Sergeant Carl Mann and his brother soldiers flooded the beaches of Normandy in a fight for freedom. Now the Catholic decorated D-Day vet is laid to rest here among fellow heroes. Two of his sons, Carl II and Miles, say he never forgot those who paid the ultimate price.
He would say, talk about them, not him.
What he experienced on that beach followed him forever. He came back home and got married. He and his wife Dolores raised 7 kids.
When you spent any time with him, you knew you were important.
27 years ago today, one of Carl's sons, Gordon, was ordained a priest. He battled cancer, and Father Gordon Mann passed away earlier this year, a month before his dad died. In the Mann family, God came first, a lesson that came from the top.
Dad's the first one to teach me about Jesus.
He taught me how to pray. He instilled that in all 7 of us kids.
And on the battlefield,
he would share Christ with his brothers who were dying.
Carl left behind brothers on that beach in Normandy where a major piece of his life was formed.
He never got off of that beach until, as I was able to tell him as he was passing, whispered down in his ear, I said, well, you're finally getting off the beach now.
4,000 men died in a single day on 5 French beaches that were foreign to them. The challenge now is keeping their memory alive. A VFW spokesperson tells us these are lessons that must be taught in schools across the country. Lauren?
Mark, what a beautiful story. I have tears in my eyes. What a day for that family as well, on D-Day, to be burying their father. Just a beautiful story. Thank you, White House correspondent Mark Irons. The fire department in Tallahassee, Florida, is investigating an arson attack at the city's co-cathedral. Church officials say someone set 4 chairs on fire at St. Thomas More near Florida State University. The walls of the sanctuary are charred and there's smoke damage. No one was injured, thankfully. The cathedral is hopeful it will be open for Sunday Mass. A report says accusations are credible that the former leader of the West Virginia diocese spent church money on liquor and travel. The 5-month probe determined that while there was no conclusive evidence of sexual misconduct with minors by Bishop Michael Bransfield, it has found indications of consistent sexual misconduct against adults. This is Archbishop William Lori. He led the investigation with 5 lay experts and said there's no excuse and no adequate explanation for why Bransfield conduct was allowed to continue. Prosecutors in Australia tell the court child sex abuse convictions against Cardinal George Pell should stand. The cardinal is shown arriving on the final day of his appeal in Melbourne. The 77-year-old was sentenced in March to 6 years in prison. No word on when the 3-judge panel will issue its ruling. Pope Francis will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin next month at the Vatican. The talks come one day before Catholic leaders from Ukraine gather in Rome to talk about the schism between the Russian and Ukrainian Orthodox churches. It will be the 3rd time the Pope meets Putin. Cardinal Walter Kasper, President Emeritus of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, says Pope Francis would probably accept married priests if it is proposed at this October's synod about the Amazon. The comments were made in an interview with a German daily earlier this week. Cardinal Kasper added, "Celibacy is not a dogma. It is not an unalterable practice." Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Ed, why are the Cardinal's comments so significant?
Well, 2 reasons really, Lauren. First of all, Cardinal Kasper is highly respected by Pope Francis. He's considered one of his closest theological advisors, so anything he says carries quite considerable weight. And secondly, it really sets the stage for what I think will become a major issue for the upcoming synod on the Amazon in October, which will be the issue of married priests and whether there's a need for it in the Amazon region.
Well, you mentioned that synod. Why is the idea of married priests being raised in this context?
Well, in the Amazon, like in quite a few remote areas in the world, there are shortages of priests, and it's difficult to get the Eucharist to people in those areas. And so there's what's called an extreme situation where there's a need for priests. And what they're proposing, some people are proposing who are organising the synod, is to ordain married men of proven virtue, as they're called. They're called viri probati, in order to help fill that gap of a shortage of priests.
What are the concerns? Does it look like a measure will pass in October?
It does look that way. It seems as though there's a push for this from the organisers. As I said, Cardinal Claudio Humes, who's the general relator of the synod, he's been pushing this for decades now. But also his predecessor, he was prefect of the Congregation for Clergy. His successor, Cardinal Benjamin Stella, also seems to be supportive of it. They're trying to say that, to reassure the faithful that actually it's not going to weaken mandatory celibacy for clergy. That's one concern about this. But it does seem as though it's going to be pushed. And now that Cardinal Kasper has said this, it seems pretty much a foregone conclusion that this will be an issue brought up at the upcoming synod.
Foregone conclusion that it will be brought up. All right, we will be following this. Thank you so much, Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register.
Thank you, Lauren.
President Trump is threatening to put even more tariffs on China, potentially $300 billion worth. And in China, state media is blasting the airwaves and the internet with anti-American messages. They're telling Chinese citizens not to travel to the U.S. because it isn't safe. For more on this, we are joined by correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee, who is reporting from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The Chinese government is preparing for a long-term economic conflict with the U.S. Both countries have raised tariffs on each other's goods. Christian advocates and officials here at the State Department are worried the communist country is working with trading partners who have poor human rights records.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Russia this week to cement economic ties.
as tensions with the U.S. rise. Xi called Russian President Vladimir Putin his closest friend and a good colleague. China and Russia have also aligned their foreign policy. One example, Syria. China is supporting the Russian-backed Syrian president, Bashar Assad, who has used chemical weapons against his own people as part of a deadly civil war. U.S. officials tell CNN the government has intelligence showing China is also selling military equipment and technology to Saudi Arabia. Blaise Mishtal, a national security expert, says China's recent moves pose a risk to U.S. interests. He says both Syria and Saudi Arabia have poor human rights records, including a lack of religious freedom and free speech. But that's not a concern for the Chinese government, who themselves see religion as a threat.
They look at religion with disdain, don't think it's something that's very valuable in human existence, and also see it as a potential source of dissension and undermining of the authority of the state.
Mishtal says that includes Christianity. Many Christians pray behind closed doors in their homes because the government will not allow them to attend church. The Chinese government even censors news stories it doesn't like, including a blackout on this week's anniversary of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Mishtal says it's vital Americans know about China's crackdown.
I think the first thing that we need to do is make clear that we stand for religious freedom at home and everywhere, and point out when that's being oppressed.
As far as the $300 billion in new tariffs, the president says he will probably wait to make a final decision until after the end of this month, when he will meet with the Chinese leader at the G20 summit. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Coming up, we talk to the head of a diocese in Illinois who is denying communion to 2 state lawmakers. Bishop Thomas Paprocki of Springfield, Illinois, is barring 2 lawmakers who led the passage of a pro-abortion law from receiving communion. And he says anyone who voted for that bill should not receive Holy Communion in his diocese. We will talk with His Excellency in just a moment. But first, we go to correspondent Jason Calvi for more on this story. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Bishop Paprocki bars the State House Speaker and Senate President. It's an ongoing debate whether Catholic politicians who support abortion should be barred. The church says it's a serious sin, but there are plenty, including Joe Biden, who say they're personally opposed but won't dictate what others do.
Hey, Joe. A Catholic who backs abortion leads the field of 2020 Democratic presidential candidates. Joe Biden's rivals criticize him for not going far enough.
The vice president is absolutely wrong on this one.
Biden does support the Hyde Amendment, which bans taxpayer funds from going to most abortions.
I'm out there fighting against the Hyde Amendment because I think that's what's right for women. We always have to make this clear. Every time we deny access to women to a lawful abortion, it means that people who don't have money, people who are in very challenging circumstances, people who are frightened, are the ones who don't get access.
Biden's not the first Catholic backing abortion to run for president. It became an issue in 2004 with Democratic nominee John Kerry. U.S. bishops then debated if pro-abortion Catholic lawmakers should be barred from communion. At their June 2004 general meeting, they wrote, "Given the wide range of circumstances involved in arriving at a prudential judgment on a matter of this seriousness, we recognize that such decisions rest with the individual bishop in accord with the established canonical and pastoral principles." Cardinal Raymond Burke has pushed to deny communion.
It is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ, and I simply wouldn't approach to receive Holy Communion if I was in the state of sin, and neither would I give Holy Communion to someone who I knew was in the state of sin.
On the other hand, former Los Angeles Archbishop Cardinal Roger Mahoney wrote, "The Archdiocese will continue to follow church teaching, which places the duty of each Catholic to examine their consciences as to their worthiness to receive Holy Communion. That is not the role of the person distributing the body and blood of Christ." The Church's canon law teaches others obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. And St. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, "Wherefore whosoever shall eat this bread or drink the chalice of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and of the blood of the Lord."
And we have the reaction of one of those being barred. Illinois Speaker of the House Mike Madigan says he was warned about it before allowing the House to debate the abortion bill. He says he believes it is more important to protect a woman's right to choose. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. And now we go to Bishop Thomas John Paprocki of the Diocese of Springfield, Illinois. Your Excellency, welcome back to our broadcast. When you and I talked a week ago, it was clear how troubled you were about Illinois' Reproductive Health Act, which passed the House and Senate and would legalize abortion until the moment of birth. Why did you bar these two politicians from receiving Holy Communion while other bishops may not do that?
Well, I did this because as Bishop of Springfield in Illinois, I'm Bishop of our state capital, and the Illinois General Assembly meets just a couple blocks away from where I live at our cathedral rectory. And so I feel that I have a certain responsibility for the actions that take place within my diocese. And I'm concerned about, first of all, the clarity of our teaching, about being clear about what the church teaches about abortion. We've had a 2,000-year history consistently teaching that abortion is wrong, going back to the first century. That was very strongly upheld at the Second Vatican Council and the document Gaudium et Spes and the Constitution of the Church in the Modern World, where it said that abortion and infanticide are abominable crimes. Pope Francis has recently spoken also very strongly about that, saying that abortion is a very grave sin and a horrendous crime. So to be consistent on that, a Catholic cannot say that I'm a Catholic in good standing and at the same time be promoting abortion rights. The other purpose of this is really to uphold the sanctity of the sacraments and the integrity of the sacraments.
And that's where Canon 915 comes in, which you say here says that it requires those who obstinately persist in manifest grave sin are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. But my question to you is, why can't the bishops agree on this? I don't understand. You're making this decision here, but maybe bishops elsewhere aren't.
Well, I think because back when we had an extended debate on this in 2004, the attitudes of many of the politicians even was much more reticent at that time. They used terminology like Bill Clinton had used about abortion being safe, legal, and rare, where I think we've seen that change, where today politicians who are promoting abortion are celebrating abortion. When these bills passed in Illinois last week, they were high-fiving each other and giving each other big hugs. And so I think that that reticence, you may see that changing, where I think bishops, I certainly hope bishops will be responding to that now.
Let me ask you, after Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York signed that state's Reproductive Health Act into law, he wrote in the New York Times, "My oath of office is to the constitutions of the United States and of the state of New York, not to the Catholic Church. My religion cannot demand favoritism as I execute my public duties." When you hear that, Bishop Paprocki, what do you think?
Well, that sounds very similar to the position that the previous Cuomo, who was governor, spoke about. Mario Cuomo, he talked about being personally opposed to abortion, but he didn't want to impose those beliefs on anyone else. And I think we've seen over the years that that's really a specious argument that doesn't hold any water, because there's no other position and any other policy matter where a politician says that I'm personally opposed to this or I personally support this, but I don't want to impose that. You never hear a politician saying, for example, that I'm personally in favor of gun control, but I wouldn't impose that belief on anyone else. Or somebody say I'm personally opposed to racism, but I wouldn't impose that belief on anyone else. And so it's only in this area where they seem to be doing that.
Split those hairs. All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Fascinating discussion. Bishop Thomas John Paprocki of the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois. Up next, a massive fine for pro-life activist David Daleiden, and analysis of the Trump administration's latest attempt to end fetal tissue research. A pro-life group says Twitter will not run its ads if they feature an ultrasound. Lila Rose of Live Action says she asked about the ads being banned and was told, quote, "We could resume ads only if we deleted the following content from our Twitter and website: anything about abortion procedures, investigations of Planned Parenthood, and all ultrasound images." Pro-life activist David Daleiden and his lawyers are ordered to pay $195,000 to the National Abortion Federation. The federation sued, saying in 2014 and 15, Daleiden and a colleague secretly videotaped Planned Parenthood employees talking about the sale of baby body parts. The ruling found that they obtained the recordings by fraud. And tonight we are going to take a closer look at the Trump administration's decision yesterday to end medical research by government scientists who use human fetal tissue. It's hailed by the pro-life movement and for promoting the dignity of life. Joining us now, Louis Brown, a former official at the Department of Health and Human Services. He's also the executive director of the Christ Medicus Foundation, a Catholic healthcare group offering Christians an alternative to traditional healthcare. Welcome back to our show.
Thanks for having me back.
This puts the president and the HHS at odds with NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which says that there is very strong evidence that fetal tissue research has scientific benefits. So is it an effective avenue for effective gains?
The one publication I've looked at that's spoken on this one organization has said that those scientific benefits are very limited. Even if so, I think the next question is at what cost? I think there's wide agreement that this is a grave violation of bioethics, a grave violation of human rights. Even if there was some scientific benefit, it's just not worth it, given we're talking about the body parts of children.
Right. When you were at HHS, was there a political battle internally over this?
Right. I couldn't speak to that, but I can say if you look at what the secretary, what the president, even the prior secretary said from the beginning, and even in HHS public documents, it would continuously talk about the importance of protecting life from conception to natural death, language we'd never heard from the federal government.
Do you talk about, was there talk about alternative methods that are just as effective?
I think there are alternative methods that are just as effective, especially if you look at the results of adult stem cell research. It doesn't go along with a lot of the sociology that's coming out of some of the corners of society today about scientific research, but the results of adult stem cell research has been enormous, and it's something that we should continue to look into.
Now, the university research projects that are underway right now will be allowed to continue. However, when there's a need for funding, it's going to come before an ethics advisory board. Will this lead to more of a marketplace for private funding, however?
Right, I think that remains to be seen. Generally, however, when the federal government says we're no longer going to do this research, conduct this research ourselves, it has a massive impact on the healthcare industry and on private institutions. It remains to be seen, but I think, and I hope this will have a chilling effect. That's something that it should have, given the material we're talking about.
What kind of energy does this new policy bring to the pro-life movement, do you think?
Sure, I think it's another good win. It's another reality that the federal government's saying, hey, look, we understand that we should protect human and civil rights from conception to natural death. And we understand that the bioethical cost of doing this kind of research, and we're going to continue to look at that step by step by step, and that's a good thing.
Thank you so much, Louis Brown, a former official at the Department of Health and Human Services, Executive Director of Christ Medicus Foundation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And tonight on EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly, Catherine Hadro asks Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell whether he thinks he'll have an opportunity to oversee the confirmation of a third Supreme Court justice during President Trump's first term.
I think it's pretty safe to say that none of the elderly liberal judges are going to leave. But you never know. Certainly if we get another opportunity before the president's first term is over, we'll certainly fill it.
And he has said no vacancies left behind. You can see the interview tonight at 10 Eastern on EWTN. Visit EWTN.com for other airing times. That does it for us, all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. We'll leave you tonight with more D-Day commemorations. Good night and God bless you.